Madam President, right now, families across my home state and the entire country want nothing more than to see us come together and pass meaningful help for the people that they see struggling every day. They want to see help for people like their neighbors and friends and family members who, through no fault of their own, have found themselves out of a job and who, despite their best efforts, are just unable to find one today. They want help for the seniors in their community who are being turned away from doctors because of devastating cuts in Medicare reimbursement rates, or all those who are struggling to afford health care because they lost a job and are now facing the impossible task of affording care on their own. Americans understand that during these difficult times we're in, people need help to make ends meet. They understand that there needs to be a lifeline for people who never thought they would need assistance from the government, but who now have nowhere else to turn. But what Americans and those in my home state of Washington don't understand is why Washington, D.C. can't seem to deliver. Why, when they make hard choices every day in their own lives to support their families and help those in need, Washington, D.C. can't do the same. Why, at a time when needs have never been greater, are the only words they hear out of Washington, D.C. is gridlock and stalemate and standstill. Well, Madam President, today we have a clear-cut example to show the American people just what's wrong with Washington, D.C. And that's because today, one single Republican senator is standing in the way of the unemployment benefits of 400,000 Americans. One single Republican senator is blocking an extension of COBRA benefits for 500,000 Americans. One single Republican senator is forcing doctors to take a 21% cut in Medicare reimbursement rates that could force seniors to be turned away from the Medicare coverage that they rely on. One single Republican senator is blocking an extension of critical highway funds that has construction workers and transportation employees at home today and that has cut critical payments to struggling states. One single Republican senator has put posturing before people, politics before families, and point scoring before the needs of struggling Americans. Madam President, the legislation we are trying so hard to pass is very straightforward. It's aimed at helping real families with real problems that they face every day, and the consequences of it being blocked by one single Republican senator are just as real. The bill we're trying to pass includes an extension of unemployment insurance, which, by the way, in my home state, hundreds of thousands of individuals rely on to buy groceries and to pay their mortgage and to help pay for school for their kids. For years, these benefits have been routinely extended in tough times, and times, by the way, have rarely been tougher than they are now. But today, families in every single one of our states are sitting around their kitchen tables trying to figure out how they're going to make it through the weeks and months ahead without these payments. Madam President, this package we're trying to pass also includes an extension of COBRA health care for workers who lost their jobs through no fault of their own and the health care benefits that come with it. In my home state, thousands of unemployed workers have the ability to see a doctor solely because we have provided this important assistance. It's a provision that's critical because health care is often the single biggest cost that unemployed workers face. In fact, you should know that on average, a monthly health care premium payment to cover a family costs over $1,000, which represents about 80% of the average unemployment check. Another vital health care measure included in this bill we're trying to pass is a provision that would overturn a staggering 21% cut in payments to doctors that accept Medicare patients. Just yesterday, my office heard from a doctor in a small community in my state, Paulsboro, Washington, who's one in a very few in his region now that are taking new Medicare patients. He said he feared just what this cut would mean for him and his practice. He told my staff that this cut would limit his ability to continue serving the needs of seniors in his area. And he's not alone. In Washington State, that cut will affect over 60,000 employees, 700,000 Medicare patients, and nearly 350,000 TRICARE patients. Finally, Madam President, this bill also includes an extension of the Federal Transportation Funding Act, which is known as Safety Lou. Allowing Safety Lou to expire, which has now happened, not only hurts construction workers and contractors who are working on these major federal highway projects in my state and across the country, it leaves our state governments bearing all the burden for the costs of these projects. In Washington State, a reimbursement payment of $13.5 million for federally sponsored projects that is due tomorrow is now in limbo. Again, all because of one single Republican senator. You know, last October, I was out on this floor fighting for an extension of unemployment benefits, and I told the story of a woman from Seattle whose name is Christina Cruz. At the time, Christina had been unemployed for 20 months after spending 10 years in human resources. Christina had just written to my office and talked about going above and beyond in her job search, a skill, by the way, that she picked up in her career in HR. But even with all of her experience, interviews for her had been few and far between. Christina talked about how she was not interested in living off the government long term, and how in the midst of this economic crisis, she just didn't have any other choice. Well, since I talked last October, Christina has stayed in touch with my office, and unfortunately, today, she's still having a hard time getting back to work, and she recently wrote an email to my office and said, and I quote, "It's truly devastating to me that I've made choices in my life, like getting good grades in school, getting my education, building up professional experience, only to find that I'm unable to find a job. I thought I'd made decisions to help ensure success in my life, and many times I barely had enough money for food. My family isn't rich, they can't afford to support me. I literally do not know what I'm going to do." And then Christina went on to voice the frustrations felt by so many about the needless holdups in getting this bill passed on providing assistance to struggling Americans. She said, and I quote, "I find it to be really egregious that we live in a democratic society, and yet a few misguided outlying voices, despite overwhelming bipartisan majority support, can hold up and block a much-needed unemployment extension. It really flies in the face of all the things I've learned about in my history books. I'm not sure how I can survive many weeks and weeks of needless holdups when I have rent and bills to pay. Sometimes I feel that if some of these senators were forced to walk a day in our shoes, then maybe they would have a sense of how it is to try and survive in this economy," end quote. Now, Madam President, that opinion is not unique to my state, to one political party, or to an issue. Every evening, families across the country turn on the nightly news and hear another story about gridlock in our nation's capital. Oftentimes, they've spent their days scanning through the classifieds, going to another job fair along with long lines and few job opportunities, or working many times multiple jobs to meet their family's most basic needs. And when they get home, they wonder just how we've spent ours. What they see is this: an entire Congress forced to spend time fighting with one Republican senator. A Congress that is forced to jump through procedural hoops and endure endless delay tactics to get meaningful and, by the way, largely bipartisan legislation passed. The obstruction of a single Republican senator, who, by the way, voted to extend these same benefits in 2008, but who has now suddenly changed his own mind. And the entire Republican Party, except for a few who've been out here this morning courageously, sit idly by as one of their members bring this entire body to a halt. American people are sick of this, and the backlash to the blockage of this bill is evidence of that. It's time for all of us to stop and think. Think about Christina and all the other Americans who sent us here to go to work for them. The people who watch the news tonight and think, God, what about me? What about all of us? You know, Christina wrote to me again recently to say it seems like government is broken. And I know that sentiment is something we hear all the time now. But the truth is, it is only broken if we allow it to be. It's only broken if we allow stunts like is happening here now to rule the day. If we can come together and put an end to short-sighted political point scoring that says obstruction is good politics and partisanship trumps progress, then we can help struggling families. If we can join together the way we did to pass the Children's Health Insurance Program or fair pay for women in the workplace, we can then restore the faith of the American people. But until we put an end to delays like the one we face by one Republican senator today, Americans are going to continue to have every right to be fed up. So, Madam President, I come to the floor today to ask the senator from Kentucky to allow us to finally move forward with consent on this bill so that Americans can get access to the help they desperately need in these very tough economic times. This is critical. Families across our states are hurting through no fault of their own, through an economic recession that they did not make happen. We all want our country to get back on its feet. We all want to be strong again. We all want this lifeline for our families so that when our country gets running strong again, that they can use the skills that they've been holding in abeyance and go back to work, so that they can get the health care they need for their children and their families until they can get that job and get moving again. And so these construction projects across our country don't come to a slamming halt, causing more Americans to sit at home without a paycheck, more Americans who can't go to the store and buy things, so more stores start to fail because they don't have the income they need, and restaurants where people can't go because they don't have a paycheck. Madam President, we're asking that the Republican colleagues who've worked with us on this bill come to the floor and urge one Republican senator to work with us to get consent so we can move past this and get to the job we've come here to do, to get people back to work, to make sure that families have health care, to make sure that we do the business of this government in a way that works for American families. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.